At 35, I was handed a death sentence, stage 2 breast cancer. I remember sitting in the sterile clinic room with the paper gown crinkling beneath me and my hands shaking so violently I could barely unlock my phone. I dialed my mother, expecting the warmth and comfort only a parent can provide when your world is falling apart. Instead, when I choked out the words, "Mom, I have cancer," she let out a long, exasperated sigh. I can never forget what she said next. She told me, "Maya, I really cannot deal with this bad luck right now. Your sister Chloe is doing her final wedding dress fitting, and Trent's family is flying in. Do not ruin this day for her." Then she hung up. I went through 8 months of grueling chemotherapy entirely alone. I lost my hair, my weight, and my faith in the people who were supposed to protect me. I vomited in my small apartment bathroom with no one to hold my hair back. 4 years later, I am completely cancer-free, and I have built a life they could never comprehend. Then last week, my phone rang. It was my mother sobbing uncontrollably because she had suffered a stroke and needed a full-time caregiver. My answer to her took exactly 6 words. But before I tell you what those 6 words were and how I finally walked away, let me tell you how my arrogant white brother-in-law helped me completely dismantle my toxic family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to save your own life. The amber liquid burned the back of my throat as I took a slow sip of aged bourbon. I was sitting on my emerald green velvet sofa, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse that offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. The city lights sparkled below me, a glittering reminder of everything I had built with my own 2 hands. My cybersecurity firm had just closed its most profitable quarter yet, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely untouchable. That peace was shattered when my phone vibrated on the glass coffee table. The screen flashed with a FaceTime request from my father, Deacon Marcus. Seeing his name always brought a familiar knot of tension to my stomach, but tonight I felt different. I tapped the screen and answered. My father did not offer a hello or ask how my day was. He never did. The camera angle was unflattering, pointing up at his stern face and his perfectly trimmed mustache. He was wearing his Sunday suit, despite it being a Tuesday evening, always needing to look the part of the respected church leader. Behind him, I could see the pale green walls of a hospital room. My mother, Mama Evelyn, was lying in the hospital bed with one side of her face visibly drooping. "Maya, pack up your apartment and get over here," my father demanded, his voice booming with the unquestionable authority he used on his congregation. "Your mother had a stroke this morning. The doctors say the left side of her body is paralyzed, and she is going to need round-the-clock care when she is discharged next week. We need you to clear out the basement room at the house and set it up for yourself. You are moving back home to take care of her." I sat perfectly still, swirling the bourbon in my glass. The ice clinked softly against the crystal. He did not ask if I had the time. He did not ask if I was willing. He issued a directive, fully expecting me to drop my entire existence to serve the woman who had abandoned me during my darkest hour. "I am sorry to hear about her stroke," I said, keeping my voice meticulously calm and level. "But I will not be moving into the basement, and I will not be her caregiver. You will need to look into hiring a home health aide or finding a rehabilitation facility." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. My father stared at the screen as if I had just spoken to him in a foreign language. His face darkened with that familiar rage he reserved specifically for me whenever I stepped out of the tiny, insignificant box he had placed me in. "Excuse me," he barked, his voice rising. "You do not tell me what I need to do. This is your mother, Maya. Family takes care of family. You do not have a husband and you do not have any children tying you down. You just sit around fixing computers all day. You have nothing holding you back from doing your duty." The sheer audacity of his words washed over me, but instead of the usual sting of rejection, I felt absolutely nothing. For my entire life, they had viewed my independence not as an achievement, but as a failure. Because I was not married to a wealthy man like my sister Chloe, my time and my life were considered completely worthless, and therefore entirely at their disposal. Before I could respond, the camera violently jerked to the side. My sister Chloe shoved her face into the frame, practically pushing our father out of the way. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she was wearing a silk designer blouse that probably cost more than some people make in a month. Even in a hospital room, she had to make sure she looked like absolute perfection. "Are you out of your mind, Maya?" she shrieked, her voice dripping with venom. "Mom is lying here paralyzed, and you are being this selfish. You are so ungrateful after everything this family has done for you." I leaned back into the velvet cushions, crossing my legs. "What exactly has this family done for me, Chloe?" I asked softly. She completely ignored the question, launching straight into her practiced victim routine. Fake tears welled up in her eyes as she glared at the camera. "You know Trent and I cannot do it," she cried, referencing her wealthy hedge fund manager husband. "Trent is working 80-hour weeks managing his investments, and I am overwhelmed running our charity foundation. We are building a legacy here in Atlanta. We actually have important responsibilities and a reputation to uphold. You have a ton of free time and no real commitments. You have to move home and do this. It is your job as the single sister to step up." I want to take a moment to reflect on Chloe standing there in the hospital room. She was 36 years old, but still acted like the spoiled teenager who threw tantrums when the spotlight shifted away from her for even a second. Her entire identity was wrapped up in being Trent Sterling's wife. Trent was a white hedge fund manager who loved playing the white savior to a prominent black family. He loved the prestige of my father's position at the megachurch, and my father loved Trent's money. Together they had created an echo chamber of elitism and arrogance. And Chloe, she was the crown jewel of their little empire. She played the part of the wealthy black socialite, perfectly attending galas, hosting brunches, and making sure everyone on Instagram knew how incredibly blessed she was. Meanwhile, I was the dark cloud, the sister who wore hoodies and worked with code, the sister who did not fit the aesthetic. When I got sick, it was as if my cancer was a personal inconvenience to their brand, and now that their brand was threatened by the reality of a paralyzed mother, they were desperately trying to shove the dirty work onto me. "You want me to throw away my life because you are too busy pretending to run a charity?" I asked, leaning closer to the camera. "I am not pretending," Chloe spat back, her eyes flashing with real anger now. "Trent and I are pillars of this community. We cannot exactly pause our lives to change adult diapers and administer medication. That is why you need to be realistic, Maya. You are alone. You have the flexibility. Quit whatever little tech support job you are doing right now and get over here. Mom needs you, and Dad cannot manage this by himself. Stop being a bitter, jealous sister and do what you are supposed to do for once in your life." The camera shook slightly as she glared at me, breathing heavily from her rant. Behind her, I could hear the steady, rhythmic beeping of my mother's heart monitor. My mother, the woman who could not be bothered to hold my hand while poison was pumped into my veins to save my life, was now lying there expecting me to sacrifice my freedom for her comfort. The entitlement was so thick it was suffocating. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my bourbon, letting the silence stretch between us. I wanted them to feel the weight of my refusal. I wanted them to realize that the dynamic had permanently shifted. I was no longer the scapegoat they could order around at will. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "I am not your maid. I am not your backup plan. And I am certainly not the solution to your inconvenience. You want Mom taken care of, then you and your wealthy husband can open up your wallets and hire a professional. Because I will not be stepping foot in that basement." Trent snatched the phone out of my sister's hand so hard the screen blurred for a second. When the camera stabilized, I was looking up at his sharp jawline and the perfectly styled sandy blonde hair he was so proud of. Trent was exactly the kind of white man who loved marrying into a prominent black family in Atlanta because it gave him a bizarre sense of authority. He loved playing the benevolent savior to the congregation while looking down on anyone who did not fit into his country club aesthetic. And right now, he was looking down at me. "Listen to me very closely, Maya," he said, his voice dropping into that calm, condescending tone he used when he wanted to sound threatening. You are not going to disrespect my wife, and you are certainly not going to turn your back on this family when they need you. You think you can just sit in whatever little apartment you are renting and ignore your own mother. Let me make this crystal clear for you. If you do not pack your bags and get over to that house by tomorrow morning, I will personally call my legal team. I will have every single one of your bank accounts frozen under the pretense of elder neglect and financial abandonment. I raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of my drink. The audacity of this man was almost impressive. You see, Trent continued, leaning closer to the camera so his blue eyes pierced through the screen. I know exactly how much a basic IT tech makes in this city. You do not have the resources to fight my lawyers. We will bury you in court fees before you even get a chance to speak to a judge. Your parents need you. I already had to pull $50,000 out of the family trust just to cover her first week of emergency care and secure the VIP rehabilitation wing. You owe this family your labor to pay that back. We are not asking you, Maya. We are telling you. I kept my face completely impassive, but inside my mind was racing at lightning speed. Trent was a hedge fund manager who constantly bragged about his 7-figure bonuses and his extensive stock portfolio. Chloe flaunted a new Hermes bag every other month on social media. Yet Trent had just admitted to pulling money from my parents' retirement trust to pay a $50,000 medical bill. A truly wealthy man would have just swiped his black card and never mentioned it. He certainly would not have needed to drain the savings of a church deacon and a paralyzed woman. You dipped into my parents' trust fund to pay for the hospital, I asked, keeping my tone perfectly flat. Trent scoffed, adjusting his expensive silk tie. Do not try to change the subject. It is family money, and it was an emergency. The point is that we are taking care of the financial burden while you are doing absolutely nothing. You have 24 hours to get your act together and get to the house. If I do not see you there, I am making the call to my firm. Do not test me. He ended the call before I could say another word. The screen went black, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the darkened glass of my phone. I did not feel fear. I did not feel intimidated by his threats of legal action. I felt a slow burning thrill because Trent Sterling had just handed me the very rope I was going to use to hang him. I stood up from my emerald velvet sofa and walked across the wide expanse of my living room. The motion sensor lights illuminated my path as I headed toward my home office. This was not the setup of a broke IT worker. Behind a reinforced glass door sat a wall of high-end servers and multiple curved monitors that powered my cybersecurity empire. I set my bourbon glass down on the sleek obsidian desk and woke up the screens. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with muscle memory. I tapped my earpiece and dialed my corporate lawyer and private investigator, Jamal. He answered on the second ring despite the late hour. Jamal, I said, my eyes already scanning lines of encrypted data on my main monitor. I need you to pull the property records for my parents' house in Buckhead. I also need a comprehensive background check on Trent Sterling's hedge fund. Every shell company, every offshore account, and every public filing. He just threatened to sue me for elder neglect and claimed he used my parents' trust to pay a medical bill. I need to know exactly how broke my arrogant brother-in-law actually is. Jamal let out a low whistle over the line. Give me 10 minutes, Maya. If he touched their property deeds, I will find it. While Jamal ran the financial traces, I logged into the hospital portal. As the emergency contact listed years ago before my family completely wrote me off, I still had access to my mother's billing records. I pulled up the invoice for her current stay. The total charges for her emergency room admission and the first few days of care amounted to exactly $45,000. I scrolled down to the payment history, expecting to see a transfer from my parents' trust account, just as Trent had claimed. Instead, I found something entirely different. There was a single payment recorded for $500. It was a charge for access to the hospital's premium family lounge and concierge coffee service billed directly to Trent's personal credit card. The remaining $44,500 was completely unpaid. The hospital had already flagged the account for collections. Trent had not paid a single dime toward her actual medical care. He had paid for his own luxury waiting room experience and then lied about draining the family trust to guilt-trip me. Which meant the money from the trust fund was gone, but it definitely did not go to the hospital. My computer chimed with an incoming secure file from Jamal. I opened it, and the truth stared back at me in stark black and white. Trent's supposedly massive hedge fund had been bleeding money for 3 years. He had lost his biggest investors and was essentially running a glorified Ponzi scheme to keep up appearances. But the most damning piece of evidence was the property deed to my parents' house. 3 years ago, Trent had somehow convinced my father to sign over the equity of their fully paid-off home. Trent had taken out a massive secret mortgage against the house, and he had completely defaulted on the payments. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings at the end of the month. He was completely broke. He had stolen my parents' retirement. He had mortgaged their home to buy designer clothes for my sister, and now that the money was gone and my mother was paralyzed, he was trying to force me into the house to act as a free nurse before the bank evicted them all. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the foreclosure notice on my screen. They were weeks away from losing everything, and they still thought they could treat me like a peasant. I reached out and gently touched the ends of my short-cropped hair. The texture was soft now, thick and healthy, but as my fingers brushed the strands, I was instantly pulled back to a time when my scalp was smooth and scarred. A time when I was 35 years old, vomiting into a plastic bucket in a sterile hospital room while poison dripped into my veins. I remembered the cold sweat, the sheer terror of facing death entirely alone, and the sound of my mother's voice telling me she was too busy picking out floral arrangements to care if I lived or died. They had left me in that chemo ward to rot, and now they expected me to save them. A cold smile spread across my face as I picked up my bourbon glass. They wanted a family reunion. They were going to get a massacre. The memory pulled me back with the force of a physical blow. The air in Dr. Evans' office was freezing cold, smelling of rubbing alcohol and old magazines. I was 35, sitting on a crinkling paper gown, with my hands clamped together so tightly my knuckles were white. The doctor was speaking, but his words sounded like they were coming from underwater. Invasive ductal carcinoma. Stage 2. Aggressive. We need to start chemotherapy immediately. The walls of the room seemed to tilt and spin. I was completely alone. I stumbled out of the clinic with a stack of pamphlets about hair loss and survival rates clutched against my chest. My first instinct was to do what any daughter would do. I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother. I needed her to tell me it was going to be okay. The phone rang 4 times before she finally answered. Background noise flooded the line instantly, women laughing, the clinking of champagne glasses, and someone barking orders about tulle and lace. "Mom!" I whispered, my voice cracking. "I am at the hospital. I just got my biopsy results back. It is cancer. I need you." There was a pause on the line, but it was not a pause of shock or devastation. It was a sigh of profound annoyance. "Maya, I really cannot deal with this bad luck right now." She snapped, her voice hushed but furious. "Chloe is doing her final fitting for her custom Vera Wang gown. Trent's entire family is flying in from Connecticut this weekend. Do not ruin this day for your sister." "Mom, I have cancer." I repeated, a sob finally breaking through my throat. "I am terrified." Her response was a masterclass in emotional cruelty. "Well, crying about it is not going to fix anything. You are a grown woman. Go home, take an aspirin, and we will talk about this after the wedding. Do not call back and upset Chloe." The line went dead. I stood on the pavement outside the oncology center, staring at the black screen of my phone as the reality of my existence in this family finally crystallized. I was not a daughter, I was a disruption. Fast forward 2 weeks later. The fluorescent lights of the chemotherapy ward buzzed above my head like angry hornets. A thick needle was taped to the back of my trembling hand, delivering a toxic cocktail of chemicals designed to kill the disease before it killed me. The nausea was already crawling up my throat, but my immediate panic was financial. The hospital required a $20,000 deposit for the first phase of my treatment plan. I had exactly $22,000 saved up from my early days doing freelance IT work. I had kept the money in a joint savings account I opened with my mother back when I was in college, trusting her to hold onto the emergency fund for me. I pulled my laptop onto my lap, navigating to the banking portal with one good hand to transfer the funds to the hospital. The screen loaded. Available balance $0. I blinked, trying to clear the chemo brain fog. I refreshed the page. $0. Panic seized my chest, squeezing tighter than the cancer ever could. I called the bank customer service line, begging the representative to explain the error. "There is no error, ma'am," the representative said gently. "Mama Evelyn Washington made an in-person withdrawal for the full amount of $22,000 yesterday morning." The room spun. I ripped the IV pole closer to me and dialed my mother's number. It went to voicemail. I dialed again. On the fourth try, the call connected. But it was not my mother who answered. It was Chloe. "What is your problem, Maya?" she hissed over the phone. "You are blowing up Mom's phone while we are at the florist." "Where is my money, Chloe?" I demanded, my voice raw and shaking. "I am sitting in a chemo chair and my hospital deposit just bounced. Mom drained my savings account. I need that money to save my life." Chloe let out a sharp, patronizing laugh. "Oh, please do not be so dramatic. Mom just borrowed it." Trent's parents decided they wanted a massive floral archway for the reception entrance, and the budget was a little tight. We needed the cash to secure the imported orchids from France. "You stole my cancer treatment money for flowers," I screamed, not caring that the other patients in the ward were staring at me. "You stole $22,000 from me. It is family money, Maya." Chloe shot back, her tone dripping with entitlement. "And right now the family needs to look good. We are marrying into old white money. We have to show them that Black excellence is real. We cannot look like some cheap charity case in front of Trent's country club relatives. You will just have to figure out a payment plan with the hospital. You are not going to ruin my perfect day just because you decided to get sick. You need to pull yourself together and stop acting like a victim." She hung up. I sat there as the poison dripped into my veins, realizing that my own mother and sister had literally chosen floral arrangements over my survival. They had stolen my lifeline to buy prestige. The day of Chloe's wedding was a masterpiece of social media manipulation. I know because I watched it unfold on Instagram while lying on a cold tile floor. The chemotherapy had completely destroyed my immune system. I had developed a severe infection and was running a dangerous fever. I dragged myself to the emergency room alone, shivering so violently, my teeth chipped. As the triage nurse pumped antibiotics into my fragile veins, I scrolled through my feed. There was Chloe looking radiant, in the Vera Wang gown my medical fund had paid for. There was Trent, smiling smugly beside her. And there was my father, Deacon Marcus, posting a perfectly curated family portrait. He had written a long caption about the blessings of family and the pride of seeing his daughter marry a successful man. But what struck me was not the caption. It was the photo itself. It was a picture from Thanksgiving the previous year. They had used Photoshop to crop me out of the frame completely so they could use it as a display at the reception. I was sick, bald, and dying, so they simply erased me from the family history. They did not want their wealthy new-in-laws asking uncomfortable questions about the missing sister. I spent the night vomiting blood into a plastic basin while my family drank top-shelf champagne and danced the night away. I promised myself in that emergency room that if I survived the cancer, I would never allow them to hurt me again. I would cut the infection out of my life just like the surgeons cut the tumor out of my chest. The memory faded, pulling me back to the present moment in my luxurious penthouse. I traced the edge of my bourbon glass, feeling the smooth crystal beneath my fingertips. 4 years ago, I was a desperate sick woman begging for the money I had earned. Today, I was the CEO of a cybersecurity empire that just sold for $45 million. And Trent, the arrogant white savior who had just threatened to freeze my non-existent IT salary, was drowning in debt and facing foreclosure on my parents' house. He thought he could use my mother's stroke as a weapon to enslave me. He thought he could order me into their basement because he assumed I was still the powerless scapegoat they had erased from their wedding photos. I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. There were already a dozen messages from my father and Chloe demanding my arrival time for tomorrow. They wanted me to report for duty at their traditional Sunday dinner after church, where they planned to hand me a list of my new caregiving chores. They wanted to humiliate me into submission, while Trent played the generous benefactor who was supposedly paying the bills. I typed a single sentence into the chat. I will be at Sunday dinner tomorrow. I hit send and watched the read receipts pop up instantly. I walked over to my walk-in closet and bypassed the casual hoodies they always criticized. I pulled out a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit the color of midnight. If they wanted a family reunion, they were going to get one. I was going to walk into that house, look my thieving sister, my cowardly father, my paralyzed mother, and my fraudulent brother-in-law right in the eyes, and I was going to dismantle their entire world brick by brick. The era of their fake black excellence was over. The audit of their sins was about to begin. I stepped into the private elevator of my penthouse and watched the doors slide shut. The polished steel reflected my tailored Tom Ford suit and my perfectly cropped hair. I looked like a woman who owned the world. But as the elevator descended, the smooth downward motion caused my stomach to drop, and suddenly I was not in a luxury high-rise anymore. The phantom smell of rubbing alcohol and industrial bleach filled my nose. I was 35 years old again, sitting on a crinkling paper gown in a freezing examination room at the Atlanta Oncology Center. The air conditioning vent above me had been rattling. I remember focusing on that sound because if I listened to the rattling, I did not have to process the words coming out of Dr. Evans' mouth. He was a kind man with tired eyes, but his voice carried the weight of an executioner. Invasive ductal carcinoma. He pointed to the black and white scans illuminated on the wall. The tumor is aggressive, Maya. It is stage 2, but it is moving fast. We need to schedule surgery and start a highly aggressive chemotherapy regimen by the end of the week. My vision blurred at the edges. The room felt like it was shrinking, crushing my lungs until I could barely draw a breath. I had walked into that clinic on my lunch break expecting to be told that the lump I found was just a benign cyst. I was a healthy, independent woman building my tech career. Cancer was something that happened to other people. Now, I was holding a glossy folder stuffed with terrifying pamphlets about survival rates, surgical oncology, and losing my hair. My hands shook so violently that the paper slipped from my grasp, scattering across the sterile linoleum floor. Dr. Evans knelt to help me gather them, his face full of professional pity. But pity could not save me. I needed my mother. I practically crawled out of the hospital, sliding my sunglasses over my face to hide my swollen red eyes. The Georgia summer heat hit me like a physical wall as I stumbled into the parking lot. I collapsed into the driver's seat of my modest sedan, locking the doors before letting out a guttural sob that tore through my chest. I was terrified. I was looking down the barrel of my own mortality, and I had never felt so small in my entire life. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and dialed Mama Evelyn. In our community, the church and the family are supposed to be the ultimate safety nets. My father was a respected deacon, and my mother was the queen of the church auxiliary board. They preached about love and unconditional support every single Sunday. I pressed the phone to my ear, praying she would tell me to come straight to the house, praying she would hold me and say we would fight this disease together. The phone rang 4 times. When the line finally connected, I was met not with a gentle hello, but with a wall of chaotic, joyful noise. I could hear the clinking of crystal champagne flutes, the soft, melodic playing of a harp, and a chorus of women laughing. In the background, a sales associate with a thick French accent was exclaiming over how stunning the bride looked. My mother had answered her phone on speaker while sitting in the VIP suite of a luxury bridal boutique in Buckhead. "Mama," I choked out the word, barely making it past the lump in my throat. "Mama, please, I need you. I am at the hospital. Maya, why are you calling me right now?" My mother snapped, her voice sharp and irritated, cutting through the bubbly atmosphere of the bridal shop. I told you specifically that today was Chloe's final dress fitting. Trent's mother flew in all the way from Connecticut on a private jet just for this. We are drinking mimosas and finalizing the alterations. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears streaming down my face and dripping onto my steering wheel. Mom, they did a biopsy on the lump I found. I sobbed, gasping for air. The doctor just gave me the results. It is cancer. I have stage 2 breast cancer. They want to start chemotherapy this week. I am so scared. Please come to the hospital. For a brief second, the line went completely silent. I waited for the maternal instinct to kick in. I waited for her to drop her champagne glass, grab her purse, and rush to her sick child. Instead, I heard my sister Chloe complaining loudly in the background. Mom, tell the seamstress that this Vera Wang lace is bunching up at the waist. Chloe whined, completely oblivious or simply uncaring. And tell Maya to stop interrupting my day. Trent's mother is judging us. My mother let out a heavy, dramatic sigh directly into the receiver. Maya. I really cannot deal with this bad luck right now. You are causing a scene and embarrassing me in front of my future in-laws. I froze. The sheer cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow, paralyzing my vocal cords. Bad luck. She called my death sentence bad luck. Look, my mother continued, her tone brisk and entirely devoid of empathy. You are a grown woman. Go home, take some aspirin, and calm down. We can talk about this next week after the wedding planning is finished. Chloe is about to marry a very important man, and we cannot have your negative energy ruining her perfect day. Do not call back and ruin this for your sister. Before I could even formulate a response to beg her not to leave me alone, the line went dead. She had hung up. I lowered the phone from my ear, staring at the screen until it went black. The sweltering heat of the car wrapped around me, but I felt colder than I had in my entire life. I was completely abandoned. My mother had actively chosen the aesthetics of a white wedding dress and the approval of a wealthy white family over the life of her own flesh and blood. In that suffocating parking lot, I realized the horrifying truth about my family. They were completely consumed by the illusion of status. Chloe marrying Trent Sterling, a wealthy white hedge fund manager, was their ultimate trophy. It was their golden ticket to the elite circles of Atlanta society. My cancer was not a tragedy to them. It was a poorly timed inconvenience that threatened to cast a shadow on their pristine public image. I did not start my car right away. I sat there for a full hour watching other patients walk in and out of the oncology center, accompanied by spouses, parents, and friends. I watched husbands hold their wives' hands. I watched mothers wrap their arms around their sick daughters. And I made a vow to myself right then and there. I would fight this disease with every ounce of strength I had in my body. I would endure the nausea, the hair loss, the burning pain in my veins, and the soul-crushing isolation. But when I came out on the other side, I would never look at my family the same way again. They had drawn the battle lines clearly. They chose prestige. I chose survival. The elevator chimed, bringing me abruptly back to the present moment. The doors slid open to the ground floor of my building where my driver was waiting beside my idling Maybach. The memories of that day 4 years ago no longer brought me pain. They brought me absolute clarity. I slid into the back seat of the luxury vehicle, smoothing the sharp lines of my designer suit. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a text message from my father. It was a reminder about Sunday dinner at their house, expecting me to show up and submissively accept my new role as my mother's unpaid nurse. I smiled, a cold, calculated smile that did not reach my eyes. My mother was now paralyzed and desperate for the very care she had so heartlessly denied me. Trent, the arrogant white savior they had worshipped, was actually drowning in debt and facing the foreclosure of the very house they were inviting me to. I had survived the poison of chemotherapy, but my family was about to find out that I was the cure to their delusion. I looked out the tinted window as my car pulled away from the curb, heading straight toward my parents' suburban mansion. I was ready to serve them the exact same mercy they had shown me on the day they left me to die. None at all. The thick needle was taped securely to the back of my trembling hand, delivering a toxic cocktail of chemicals designed to kill the disease before it killed me. The fluorescent lights of the oncology ward buzzed above my head like a swarm of angry hornets. I was entirely alone. There was no mother holding my other hand, no sister bringing me magazines, no father praying over my chair. It was just me, the steady drip of the IV bag, and the bone-deep chill of the medicine crawling up my arm. The physical pain was excruciating, but the immediate panic clawing at my throat was strictly financial. The hospital billing coordinator had visited my chair 10 minutes earlier with a sympathetic smile and a clipboard. My aggressive treatment plan required an immediate deposit of $20,000. I was not worried at first. I had spent my entire 20s working grueling hours doing freelance IT work and building custom servers. I had scraped together exactly $22,000. I kept it in a joint savings account that my mother had insisted we open together back when I was in college. She had always told me it was my emergency fund, and she was just on the account to help me manage it. If stage 2 breast cancer was not an emergency, I did not know what was. I pulled my laptop out of my bag, resting it awkwardly on my lap to avoid pulling the IV line. I navigated to the banking portal, typing in my credentials with my one good hand. I intended to wire the funds directly to the hospital billing department and secure my treatment schedule. The page loaded. I blinked, trying to clear the heavy fog. The chemotherapy was already settling over my brain. I refreshed the browser. I closed it and logged back in. Available balance $0. My heart slammed against my ribs. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead that had nothing to do with the cancer drugs. I fumbled for my phone and dialed the bank customer service line, begging the representative to explain the glitch. The woman on the other end put me on a brief hold. When she came back, her voice was gentle but absolute. "There is no error, ma'am. Evelyn Washington made an in-person withdrawal for the full amount of $22,000 this morning at 9 o'clock. The account was emptied and closed." The room started to spin. The walls of the chemo ward felt like they were closing in, crushing the breath out of my lungs. I ripped my phone away from my ear and immediately dialed my mother's number. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed again, my hands shaking so badly, I dropped the phone on the sterile linoleum floor. I picked it up and dialed a third time. Finally, the call connected. But it was not my mother who answered. "What is your problem, Maya?" Chloe hissed into the receiver. Her voice was muffled, as if she had stepped into a hallway to take the call, but the loud, chaotic background noise of a busy design studio was unmistakable. "You are blowing up Mom's phone, and she is right in the middle of a consultation. Where is my money, Chloe?" I demanded, my voice raw and cracking. "I am sitting in a chemotherapy chair, and my hospital deposit just bounced. Mom drained my savings account. I need that money to save my life." Chloe let out a sharp, patronizing laugh that echoed in my ear. "Oh, please, Maya, do not be so dramatic. Mom just borrowed it." "Borrowed it," I screamed, not caring that the other patients in the ward were turning to stare at me. "I have cancer. You stole $22,000 from me. Keep your voice down." Chloe snapped back, her tone dripping with absolute entitlement. "Trent's parents decided they wanted a massive floral archway for the country club reception entrance. The budget was a little tight. We needed the cash to secure the imported orchids from France. Mom knew you would understand." I sat frozen, the poison continuing to drip into my veins. I could not process the words. They took my life savings, the money meant to keep me alive, for flowers. "You stole my cancer treatment money for orchids," I whispered, the sheer horror of the reality sinking into my bones. "It is family money," Maya, Chloe stated, as if she were explaining basic math to a toddler. "And right now the family needs to look good. You do not seem to grasp the magnitude of this wedding. Trent's family is old Connecticut money. We are blending two worlds here. We have to show his people that Black excellence is real. We cannot have his hedge fund partners walking into a basic reception and looking down on us. We refuse to look like some cheap charity case in front of his wealthy white relatives." My breath hitched. You are leaving me to die so you can impress a bunch of snobs at a country club. Stop playing the victim, Maya. Chloe sighed heavily. You are a smart girl. You write code in a dark room all day. You can easily figure out a payment plan with the hospital or take out a medical loan. Mom and Dad have worked too hard for this social standing in Atlanta to let your bad timing ruin everything. We have a reputation to uphold at the megachurch and in this city. You are not going to ruin my perfect day just because you decided to get sick right before my wedding. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat was completely constricted by a mixture of profound grief and boiling rage. You need to pull yourself together. Chloe continued, her voice devoid of a single ounce of human compassion. Stop acting like the world revolves around your little medical issue. Mom will pay you back eventually when she has the spare cash. Until then, handle your own problems like an adult and stop stressing out this family. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap. I stared at the clear liquid traveling down the plastic tube and disappearing under my skin. My own mother, the woman who stood in front of the congregation every Sunday and preached about love and sacrifice, had walked into a bank, looked a teller in the eye, and drained her sick daughter's life savings to buy French orchids. My sister had justified it because maintaining the illusion of wealth for her arrogant white fiancé was more important than my survival. I did not cry. The tears would not come. Instead, a terrifying, absolute calm washed over me. In that freezing oncology ward tethered to a machine, I realized that my family had already buried me. They had written me off as a casualty, a minor inconvenience on their climb to the top of Atlanta's elite social ladder. They chose the floral arrangements over my pulse. They chose Trent Sterling's approval over my future. I leaned my head back against the vinyl medical chair and looked up at the harsh fluorescent ceiling. They thought I was just a quiet, obedient IT worker who would take out a loan, suffer in silence, and fade away so they could shine. They had no idea who they had just created. The day of the wedding arrived with a cruel irony. While my sister was stepping into her custom Vera Wang gown, I was collapsing onto the bathroom floor of my apartment. The chemotherapy had completely wiped out my immune system. A neutropenic fever hit me like a freight train. My temperature spiked to 104 degrees. I could not stand. I could barely breathe. I dragged myself to the front door and managed to unlock it for the paramedics before my vision went completely black. I woke up in the intensive care unit, surrounded by the frantic beeping of heart monitors and the sterile smell of bleach. A nurse was adjusting a tangled web of IV lines taped to my arms. When I tried to speak, the taste of copper and dry blood coated my tongue. The nurse leaned over with a sympathetic smile, telling me I had slipped into a brief coma. My body had gone into septic shock. She gently wiped my forehead with a damp cloth and told me I was incredibly lucky to be alive. Then she asked the question that shattered whatever tiny fragment of hope I had left. She asked if there was anyone they should call because my emergency contacts had sent every single hospital notification straight to voicemail. I shook my head, unable to form the words. I asked for my phone. My hands trembled as I unlocked the screen. I expected to see at least one missed call from my mother or my father. Just one text message asking if I was alive. There was absolutely nothing. My notifications were entirely empty of their concern, but my social media feed was overflowing with their celebration. I lay in that stiff hospital bed fighting for every breath while I watched my family put on the performance of a lifetime. The screen of my phone illuminated a reality that felt like a psychological horror movie. There was Chloe dripping in diamonds and silk gliding across a custom monogrammed dance floor. There was Trent looking like the smug, wealthy savior surrounded by his old money relatives from Connecticut. And right there at the entrance of the grand ballroom stood the massive archway of imported French orchids. The orchids my mother had purchased with the $22,000 she stole from my cancer fund. The flowers were flawless and vibrant, literally bought with my blood and my survival. I kept scrolling, my thumb numb and heavy. I clicked on my father's profile. Deacon Marcus had uploaded a massive photo album titled The Perfect Union of Two Legacies. He wrote paragraphs about the blessing of family, about Black excellence merging with generational wealth, and about how proud he was to present his flawless family to the world. But it was the main profile picture that made my heart physically ache. It was a professional family portrait taken the previous Thanksgiving, before I had lost my hair to the chemo. In the original photo, I was standing right next to Chloe. In the photo my father posted, I was completely gone. He had hired someone to digitally crop me out of the picture. They erased my body, smoothed over the background, and brought Trent into the frame so it looked like a perfect family of 4: mother, father, daughter, and wealthy white son-in-law. They did not want Trent's country club relatives asking uncomfortable questions about the sick bald sister who was not at the reception. They did not want my cancer staining their pristine aesthetic. Instead of explaining my absence, they just erased my entire existence. They deleted me from the family history, just to keep up appearances for a room full of arrogant strangers. I stared at the manipulated photo until the screen timed out and went dark. I did not cry. The betrayal was so profound, so meticulously executed, that it burned away any remaining grief. I lay alone in the intensive care unit, listening to the rhythmic pumping of the machines keeping me alive. In that cold, sterile room, I finally understood the rules of engagement. My family had evaluated my life and decided I was a liability. They traded my heartbeat for a high society status symbol. The blinding white lights of the hospital ceiling slowly faded away as the memory dissolved. The smooth hum of my penthouse air conditioning brought me back to the present moment. I was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling lights of Atlanta. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the crisp, cool air fill my perfectly healthy lungs. I ran my hands down the lapels of my midnight blue Tom Ford suit. The fabric was sharp, expensive, and tailored to perfection. I picked up my crystal bourbon glass from the obsidian desk and took one final sip. The liquor burned a pleasant trail down my throat, matching the heat of the anticipation building in my chest. I looked at my phone where the family group chat was still lighting up with demands from my father and Chloe. They were ordering me to show up at the house tomorrow for Sunday dinner. They expected the obedient invisible sister to walk through the front door and submissively accept her new role as a free nurse for a paralyzed mother. They thought Trent's pathetic threats about freezing my bank accounts would force me into compliance. I smiled at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. My family had made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed the woman walking into their dining room tomorrow was the same desperate sick girl they abandoned in a hospital bed. They buried me 4 years ago. Now it is my turn to read their eulogy. The valet at the Greater Zion Cathedral Fellowship Hall barely had time to open my door before I stepped out into the humid Atlanta night. This was not a humble church gathering in a modest basement. Greater Zion was a megachurch, and their annual fundraising gala was a high society spectacle that rivaled any corporate event in the city. Valets parked rows of Mercedes and Range Rovers, while professional photographers snapped pictures of the congregants on a red carpet. The massive fellowship hall had been transformed with crystal chandeliers, towering centerpieces, and velvet-draped tables. This was the epicenter of Black elite society in Atlanta, and my father, Deacon Marcus, treated it like his personal kingdom. I walked through the towering mahogany double doors, and the heavy bass of a live gospel jazz band vibrated against the floorboards. My midnight blue Tom Ford suit cut a sharp, commanding silhouette through the sea of pastel dresses and conservative church attire. I did not shrink into the shadows. I walked straight down the center of the grand foyer with my head held high, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble. I could feel the eyes of the congregation shifting toward me. I was supposed to be the invisible, struggling sister, the one who faded into the background. Instead, I looked like a woman who could buy the entire building and everyone inside it. Chloe spotted me first. She was standing by the towering champagne fountain draped in a sequined gown that looked entirely too heavy for the occasion. Her jaw actually dropped, and her manicured hand shook so badly the champagne spilled over the edge of her crystal flute. Next to her, Trent froze mid-laugh. His smug, confident posture shattered instantly. He pulled out his phone frantically, probably checking to see if his legal team had successfully frozen my bank accounts. He had fully expected me to be on my hands and knees in my parents' dark basement scrubbing floors and preparing a medical bed. My presence here was a direct defiance of his ultimate authority. Before Chloe or Trent could march over and cause a public scene, a heavy hand clamped down on my bicep. It was my father. Deacon Marcus wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and a smile so intensely fake it looked painful. He did not say a single word to me. He just tightened his iron grip, pulling me away from the main ballroom and dragging me into a secluded alcove near the choir preparation room. "What in the name of God are you doing here?" my father hissed the moment we were out of sight. His fake smile vanished, replaced by a snarl of pure outrage. "You were given strict instructions, Maya. You are supposed to be at the house right now, receiving the medical equipment for your mother. I explicitly told you to clear out that basement room and prepare for her arrival." I calmly looked down at his hand gripping my arm and then looked directly into his eyes. "Let go of me," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I will not ask you twice." My father blinked clearly, taken aback by the ice in my tone. He had spent his entire life bullying the women in his family into submission, using his religious title to demand absolute obedience. But he dropped his hands, stepping back and adjusting his suit jacket to regain his composure. "You are actively trying to destroy this family," he spat, keeping his voice low to avoid echoing down the marble hall. "Trent and Chloe are out there entertaining the most powerful political and financial figures in Atlanta. Tonight is the most important night of Trent's career. He is being officially nominated for the Church Investment Board. Do you have any idea what it means for this family to have a top-tier hedge fund manager controlling the church financial committee? It elevates us. It secures our legacy in this community. And you are jeopardizing everything by showing up here in defiance of your brother-in-law." I let out a sharp laugh. Jeopardizing his campaign by existing outside of a basement. If Trent's reputation is so fragile that my mere physical presence shatters, it may be he should not be managing millions of dollars in church donations. "You are a selfish, bitter woman," my father sneered, stepping closer to intimidate me. "Trent donated a massive sum of money to secure this board nomination. He is funding the new youth center. He is doing the heavy lifting for this family, while you do absolutely nothing. Your mother is lying paralyzed in a hospital bed and you refuse to do your duty. Trent is the only reason we are not drowning in medical debt right now. You are deliberately embarrassing us by refusing to play your part." I looked at the man who had raised me, realizing just how deeply he had been manipulated by his own greed. He worshipped Trent's whiteness and supposed wealth so blindly that he would gladly sacrifice his own daughter to keep the money flowing. "Are you absolutely certain Trent is the one keeping this family afloat, Dad?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Because a truly wealthy man would not need his father-in-law to co-sign his reputation at a church fundraiser. A truly wealthy man would not need to constantly remind you of how much he is spending." My father opened his mouth to shout at me, but a sharp voice cut him off. "What on earth are you doing here?" Chloe marched into the alcove, her sequined gown swishing aggressively. Trent followed close behind her, his face flushed red with anger. He stepped right up to me, trying to use his height to tower over me. He pointed a finger directly at my face. "I told you exactly what would happen if you defied me." Maya, Trent growled, his voice vibrating with rage. "I told you I would call my lawyers. I told you I would freeze every single asset you have. You think you can call my bluff? I will have you destroyed by tomorrow morning. You will not be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone afford whatever cheap knockoff suit you are wearing right now." Chloe sneered, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "You look ridiculous, Maya. You think dressing up and crashing my husband's nomination gala is going to make us respect you? You are just proving exactly how unhinged and jealous you are. Mom is suffering, and you are parading around a church event trying to steal attention. You are a disgrace to this family. Get out before I have security throw you out." I slowly reached out and pushed Trent's pointing finger away from my face. I smoothed the lapel of my Tom Ford suit, refusing to break eye contact with the arrogant man who thought he owned my family. "You should really check your banking app before you threaten to freeze my assets, Trent." I said, my voice perfectly level. You might find that your own legal team is a little too busy dealing with your collapsing hedge fund to care about my bank accounts. Trent's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. A flash of pure, unfiltered panic crossed his face before he quickly masked it with outrage. "What are you talking about, you crazy woman?" he sputtered. Before he could finish his sentence, the heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open. A prominent church elder poked his head into the alcove. "Deacon Marcus Trent, it is time. The pastor is ready to announce the nominees for the investment board. They need you both on stage right now." My father immediately plastered his fake smile back onto his face. "We will be right there," he called out to the elder. He turned back to me, his eyes flashing with a final warning. "You will stand in the back. You will keep your mouth shut. And when this gala is over, you are going home to apologize to your mother." "Come on, Trent." Trent glared at me one last time, adjusting his tie with shaking hands, before following my father out of the alcove. Chloe bumped her shoulder hard against mine as she walked past. "You are going to pay for this, Maya," she whispered venomously. "I am going to make sure you have absolutely nothing left." I watched them march back into the ballroom to play their perfect roles. They were so desperate to maintain their illusion of superiority that they were marching straight into a financial slaughterhouse. I checked my phone. My lawyer Jamal had just sent a confirmation text. The financial audit of Trent's hedge fund and the church donation records was complete. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and followed them into the grand ballroom. I was not going to stand in the back. I was going to secure a front row seat to their destruction. I followed them into the grand ballroom, taking a seat at a table near the front. The sheer scale of the Greater Zion Cathedral fundraising gala was designed to overwhelm the senses. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over hundreds of guests dressed in their finest evening wear. The gentle hum of the gospel jazz band faded as Pastor Williams approached the center stage. His booming voice echoed through the massive hall, commanding instant silence. He spoke passionately about the future of the church, the importance of financial stewardship, and the need for strong leadership. Then he introduced the newest nominee for the church investment board. He called Trent a visionary, a dedicated family man, and a true blessing to their congregation. Trent walked up the carpeted steps to the podium with a practiced look of deep humility. He adjusted the microphone and gazed out over the sea of faces. Watching him stand there soaking in the adoration of a predominantly black congregation made my blood boil. He played the role of the benevolent savior flawlessly. He knew exactly how to use his privilege and his supposed wealth to buy their trust. He leaned into the microphone and began his speech with a heavy theatrical sigh. "My brothers and sisters," Trent said, his voice dripping with fake emotion, "this has been a trying season for my family. As many of you know, my mother-in-law, Mama Evelyn, suffered a severe stroke just a few days ago." A collective gasp of sympathy rippled through the ballroom. People murmured prayers and shook their heads in sorrow. Trent paused, perfectly timing his silence to let the drama settle over the crowd. "It is during these moments of profound tragedy that you see the true fabric of a family." Trent continued. "Sickness has a way of stripping away all pretenses. It reveals who is willing to stand up and who is willing to run away. When an elderly parent falls ill, you expect their own flesh and blood to rush to their side. You expect their children to drop everything and care for the woman who gave them life. But sadly, that is not always the reality. Sometimes the burden is simply too heavy for selfish shoulders to bear. Sometimes children turn their backs on their own mother when she needs them the most." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The sympathetic murmurs turned into sharp, judgmental whispers. Heads began to turn in my direction. My father had clearly been laying the groundwork for this public shaming. He and Chloe must have spent the entire week telling the church elders that I had abandoned my paralyzed mother. Trent was weaponizing my refusal to be their free maid, and he was doing it on a stage with a microphone. "But God calls us to step into the gap," Trent declared, his voice rising with righteous indignation. "When others walk away, we are called to serve. Chloe and I refuse to let Mama Evelyn suffer. We refuse to let Deacon Marcus carry this heavy cross alone. We are taking on the financial and physical weight that others cowardly refuse to carry. Because that is what true family does. We protect our own. Chloe was sitting at the VIP table right next to the stage. She pulled a lace handkerchief from her purse and dabbed at her eyes, putting on an Oscar-worthy performance of a heartbroken but resilient daughter. My father reached over and patted her hand, looking up at Trent with absolute reverence. It was sickening. They were using my mother's stroke as a prop to elevate their own social standing. Trent was not finished. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it up for the entire room to see. To honor my mother-in-law and to demonstrate our unwavering commitment to the future of this community, Chloe and I are making a pledge tonight, Trent announced, his voice echoing powerfully through the sound system. We are donating $100,000 to the Greater Zion Youth Center Fund. The ballroom erupted. Hundreds of people leaped to their feet in a standing ovation. The applause was deafening. Pastor Williams rushed back onto the stage to shake Trent's hand, vigorously praising God for his generosity. Chloe stood up and blew kisses to the crowd, acting like royalty receiving tribute from her subjects. I remained seated. I did not clap. I did not look away. The world around me felt distorted and warped, as if I was watching a psychological thriller unfold in real time. The glaring stage lights bounced off Trent's perfectly white teeth as he smiled for the event photographers. The sheer narcissism radiating from him was suffocating. He genuinely believed he was untouchable. He believed he had just publicly humiliated me and cemented his power over the church finances in one swift move. Women at the tables next to mine were openly glaring at me. I could hear their harsh whispers cutting through the applause. They called me ungrateful. They whispered about the prodigal daughter who abandoned her sick mother while the good white son-in-law stepped up to save the day. They looked at me with absolute disgust. I picked up my glass of sparkling water and took a slow, refreshing sip. Let them stare. Let them whisper. Let Trent soak in the roaring applause of a room full of people he was actively robbing. The performance was flawless, but the reality behind it was a rotting corpse. Trent did not have $100,000. Trent did not even have $100 to his name. I knew for a fact that the piece of paper he was holding up was entirely worthless. He was standing on a stage preaching about family and sacrifice while secretly mortgaging the home of the very people applauding him. He was a parasite feeding on their trust. The standing ovation slowly died down as guests returned to their seats, wiping away tears of joy. Trent walked back down the stairs and took his seat next to Chloe, puffing his chest out with arrogant pride. My father leaned over and patted Trent on the back, looking at him as if he were the second coming of Christ himself. I set my glass down on the crisp white tablecloth. The time for observation was over. Trent had played his hand. He had set the stage, gathered the audience, and delivered his lines. Now it was my turn to flip the script. I adjusted the cuffs of my suit jacket and prepared to give this congregation a financial revelation they would never forget. I stepped out from behind my table and my heels sank slightly into the thick carpet before striking the hardwood aisle leading to the stage. The thunderous applause was still echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the Greater Zion Cathedral Fellowship Hall. Every face was turned toward the podium, glowing with admiration for the white savior who had just promised them the world. I moved with a singular, unbreakable focus. My midnight blue Tom Ford suit felt like armor. As I closed the distance, the peripheral noise faded. I kept my eyes locked on Trent. His smug, triumphant smile began to falter the second he registered my approach. I climbed the short staircase to the stage. Pastor Williams was still clapping, a wide, joyful smile stretching across his face. He noticed me, and his hands slowed, confusion wrinkling his forehead. Trent saw me coming and instinctively shifted his weight, trying to block the podium with his broad shoulders. He leaned in, his voice a panicked hiss meant only for my ears. He told me to get off the stage right now and that I was making a fool of myself. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I simply reached past him and firmly grasped the cold metal of the microphone stand. With one swift, undeniable motion, I pulled the microphone from its cradle. The feedback whined sharply through the massive speakers, a piercing squeal that instantly killed the remaining applause. Hundreds of heads snapped in my direction. The ballroom plunged into a heavy, suffocating silence. Down at the VIP table, Chloe jumped to her feet. The fake tears of a grieving daughter had vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. My father, Deacon Marcus, half rose from his chair, his hand reaching out as if he could somehow pull me back down through sheer force of will. I looked out over the sea of congregants, letting the silence stretch just long enough to ensure every single person in that room was hanging on my next breath. My brother-in-law is incredibly generous. I began, my voice ringing clear and steady through the cavernous hall. It takes a special kind of man to stand before a congregation of his peers, invoke the name of the Lord, and promise $100,000 to build a youth center. It is a beautiful gesture. A few uncertain murmurs rippled through the crowd. Trent exhaled a shaky breath next to me, perhaps foolishly believing I had come up here to validate his performance. He adjusted his tie, trying to regain his posture. "But there is just one small problem, Pastor Williams." I continued, turning slightly to face the head of the church. "That check Trent just held up for all of you to see is going to bounce. It is completely and utterly worthless. Because Trent Sterling does not have a single dime to his name." The collective gasp from the ballroom was audible. It sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the building. Trent lunged for the microphone, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. He demanded I give him the microphone, his polished veneer cracking wide open. I stepped out of his reach with practiced ease. Pastor Williams held up a hand, stepping between us. He warned me that this was not the time or place for family grievances, and reminded me that Trent had just made a monumental commitment to the youth. "I am not here to talk about family grievances, Pastor," I replied, my voice projecting loud and clear over the speakers. "I am not here to debate morality or who takes care of my paralyzed mother. I am here to talk about math. I am here to talk about the financial security of Greater Zion Cathedral." I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. I ripped the seal open and pulled out a stack of banking logs, highlighted transaction records, and a certified audit report. I held the stack up high, making sure the harsh stage lights caught the official red stamp of my cybersecurity firm. "Yesterday morning," I said, my voice cutting through the rising whispers of the crowd, "my firm was contracted by an independent financial oversight committee to run a routine deep-level diagnostic on the banking systems affiliated with this church investment board. We specialize in tracing digital footprints that people think they have successfully erased." Down in the front row, I saw Elder Harrison, one of the wealthiest and most respected men in the congregation, sit up rigidly. He had been the primary target of Trent's networking for the past 2 years. What my team found in less than 48 hours of scanning was not a robust hedge fund, generating wealth for the community. I continued pacing slowly across the stage so every side of the room could see me. We found a labyrinth of shell companies. We found offshore accounts disguised as philanthropic trusts. But most importantly, we traced the exact destination of the capital that several elders in this very room entrusted to Trent Sterling for real estate development. Trent was practically vibrating with rage. He looked wildly at Pastor Williams, shouting that I was a disgruntled, bitter sister-in-law trying to ruin his reputation because my family finally cut me off. He demanded that security remove me. I ignored him completely, locking eyes with Elder Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, 3 months ago, you and 4 other deacons wired a combined total of $2.5 million into Trent's supposedly high-yield community growth fund. You were promised returns that would help build the new community outreach center. Am I correct?" Elder Harrison slowly stood up, his face grim and unreadable. He confirmed that I was correct. "Trent did not invest that money," I stated, dropping the absolute hammer on the room. "He never bought the commercial properties in Midtown. He never secured the permits. He took your $2.5 million and he wired it directly into a private, untraceable account registered in the Cayman Islands. An account that belongs solely to my sister Chloe Sterling." Chloe let out a piercing shriek from the VIP table, screaming that it was a lie. I pulled a specific page from the stack and read it directly into the microphone. "Wire transfer. October 14th. $300,000 routed from the Church Growth Fund to the Cayman account, then immediately dispersed to pay off a defaulted mortgage on Trent and Chloe's Buckhead estate. Wire transfer. November 2nd. $85,000 routed to a luxury automotive dealership to prevent the repossession of Chloe's luxury SUV. Wire transfer December 1st. $120,000 spent at a private boutique in Paris for designer handbags, jewelry, and a custom wardrobe. I let the paper drop to the floor of the stage. You did not invest in the community, Elder Harrison. You invested in my sister's closet. You funded their lavish lifestyle because Trent's actual hedge fund went bankrupt 3 years ago. He is a fraud. He has been using his marriage into my father's family and his proximity to this church to rob you blind. The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. Women were shouting. Men were jumping out of their seats. The veneer of polite high society Southern decorum completely evaporated. Elder Harrison stormed past his table, his face thunderous, pointing a shaking finger at my father, Deacon Marcus, who had slumped into his chair as if the breath had been knocked out of him. Elder Harrison roared over the escalating noise, demanding to know if my father had brought this thief into their sanctuary to steal their money. My father was speechless. His eyes darted frantically around the room, witnessing the total collapse of his precious reputation. He reached for his chest, his breathing becoming shallow and ragged, the stress of the public humiliation triggering a physical reaction he could not control. On stage, Trent realized the game was over. The charismatic white savior facade melted away, revealing the desperate cornered con artist underneath. He lunged at me again, his hands curling into fists, but this time I did not just step away. I stood my ground. I would not take another step if I were you, Trent. I warned, my voice deadly calm. Because the audit report I just read from is not the only copy. I sent the complete digital file including every routing number, every forged signature, and every fake prospectus you handed to these elders directly to the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. Trent's face drained of all color. He looked like a ghost. He stumbled backward, his foot catching on a microphone cable, nearly tripping over himself. He looked out at the furious crowd, then down at Chloe, who was hyperventilating at the VIP table, her hands clutching her face in absolute terror. The standing ovation they had enjoyed just 5 minutes ago felt like it had happened in another lifetime. Now the only sounds filling the grand ballroom were the shouts of outraged investors, the panicked cries of my sister, and the heavy, undeniable weight of the truth. I adjusted the cuffs of my jacket once more, placed the microphone gently back onto its stand, and prepared to watch the golden empire of Trent and Chloe burn to the ground. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting long, sharp shadows across the hardwood floor. It had been less than 12 hours since I walked off the stage at Greater Zion Cathedral, but the fallout was already spectacular. My phone had not stopped vibrating all night, with panicked texts from church elders, automated alerts from my security software, and hysterical voicemails from my parents. But I was waiting for one specific call. I poured myself a fresh cup of black coffee, sat at my obsidian desk, and woke up my monitors. Right on cue, at exactly 8 in the morning, an incoming video call flashed on my center screen. It was from Chloe. I clicked accept. The video feed connected, and I was immediately met with a violently shaking screen. Trent was standing in his downtown office, and he had just slammed his fists down onto his mahogany desk so hard the webcam rattled. His usually perfectly styled blonde hair was completely disheveled, sticking up in erratic clumps. The expensive, bespoke suit he wore the night before was gone, replaced by a rumpled dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar and stained with what looked like spilled coffee. The cool, collected white savior persona had entirely evaporated. What stared back at me was a frantic, cornered animal. "I am going to destroy you!" Maya Trent screamed. His face flushed a dark, dangerous red. "I am going to sue you for everything you are worth. Defamation, corporate espionage, cyber terrorism, and breach of confidentiality. I have my legal team drafting the injunctions right now." You are going to spend the rest of your pathetic life rotting in a federal prison for hacking my accounts. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the dark liquid warm my throat. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. You cannot sue someone for doing the exact job they were hired to do. Trent, I replied, my voice perfectly level, contrasting his hysterical shouting. The senior deacons of the church authorized a comprehensive financial audit of the Community Growth Fund. They signed the contract with my firm 3 days ago. Everything my team did was entirely legal, fully documented, and well within the boundaries of financial oversight. You were not hacked, you were audited, and you failed spectacularly. Trent slammed his hand against the desk again, causing the camera to shudder violently. You stole confidential financial records. He roared, spittle flying from his lips and hitting the camera lens. You had no right to broadcast my private investments to a room full of people. You ruined my reputation. You ruined my career. You ruined your own career when you decided to use a church congregation as your personal piggy bank, I countered. That is when the mask completely fell off. The polite progressive ally facade that Trent had used to infiltrate my family and the Atlanta elite shattered into a million pieces. The deep-seated prejudice he had been harboring all these years finally bubbled to the surface. You listen to me, you arrogant, bitter bitch, he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at the camera. You think you are so smart sitting behind your little computer screens, but you are nothing. You are a diseased, ugly college dropout who could not even keep her own hair. I took your family out of the ghetto. I gave your sister a life of pure luxury. I elevated the Washington name in this city. Before me, you people were nothing but background noise. You should be down on your knees thanking me for bringing actual wealth and class into your pathetic lives. But instead, you pull this stunt because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of Chloe because she is beautiful and married to a successful man, while you are destined to die alone in a cold hospital room. The sheer toxicity of his words hung in the air. He was trying to tear me down using the most painful moments of my life as ammunition. He thought bringing up my cancer, my hair loss, and my single status would break my spirit. He wanted to see me cry. He wanted me to react with the same unhinged emotion he was displaying. But I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical satisfaction. He was proving exactly who I always knew he was. Chloe suddenly shoved her way into the video frame, pushing Trent slightly to the side. Her face was puffy and streaked with mascara. She looked like she had not slept a single minute. Are you happy now, Maya? Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. Are you proud of what you did? My phone has been blowing up all morning. The country club just called to suspend our membership. The charity board wants me to step down immediately. My friends will not even reply to my texts. You took everything from me. You embarrassed me in front of the entire city. I did not embarrass you, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. Your husband embarrassed you when he stole millions of dollars to buy those designer bags you are so proud of. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see the rats scattering. You are a monster, Chloe sobbed, gripping the edge of Trent's desk. Mom is lying paralyzed in a hospital bed, and instead of coming together as a family, you decided to humiliate us. We were supposed to be building a legacy. Trent was going to make us untouchable. Now we are going to be a laughingstock. You did this because you hate me. You have hated me ever since I got engaged. I do not hate you, Chloe, I replied calmly. Hating you would require me to care about you, and frankly, you are not worth the emotional investment. You and your husband made a choice to exploit our parents, to exploit our community, and to exploit my illness. You built a house of cards on top of stolen money, and now you are mad at the wind for blowing it down. Trent pushed his way back to the center of the screen, his breathing heavy and ragged. This is not over, Maya, he spat, his eyes wild with desperation. I have powerful friends. I have connections in this city that you cannot even fathom. I will drag your tech company through the mud. I will tell the press that you orchestrated this entire smear campaign because you are an unstable, angry woman seeking revenge against her successful family. Nobody is going to believe a bitter spinster over a respected investment manager. I will make sure you lose every single client you have. I smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey run directly into a trap. I reached over and tapped a key on my keyboard, opening a secondary monitor. "You can try to call your powerful friends Trent," I said, my tone dripping with icy condescension. "But I highly doubt they are going to answer the phone. The FBI Financial Crimes Division executed a search warrant on your offshore accounts at 6 o'clock this morning." The color completely drained from Trent's face. He stood frozen, staring at the camera, as the reality of my words slowly registered in his panicked brain. I continued driving the nail directly into the coffin. "You see, when I submitted the audit report to the authorities, I also provided them with the digital breadcrumbs leading to the Cayman Islands accounts. I gave them the IP addresses you used, the time-stamped transfer logs, and the forged signatures you submitted to the church board. You are not going to be making any phone calls to the press, Trent. You are going to be making phone calls to a criminal defense attorney, assuming you can find one who works pro bono, since all your assets were frozen 2 hours ago." Trent's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The blustering, racist tyrant from 2 minutes ago had vanished entirely, replaced by a terrified little boy, realizing he had played a game he could not win. Chloe let out a horrified gasp, covering her mouth with both hands, as she looked at her husband for reassurance that he could not provide. I leaned back in my chair, letting the absolute silence on their end of the call stretch out. I wanted them to marinate in the terror. I wanted them to feel the exact same helplessness I felt 4 years ago, sitting in that freezing oncology ward with $0 in my bank account. "Do not ever threaten me again, Trent," I said, my voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "You thought you could use my family to line your pockets and use me as a convenient scapegoat, but you picked a fight with the wrong woman. Now sit down, shut up, and wait for the feds to knock on your office door." I reached out and clicked the end call button. The screen went black, cutting off their panicked faces instantly. I took another sip of my coffee, relishing the absolute quiet of my penthouse. The first domino had officially fallen. But the real destruction was only just beginning. At 35, I was handed a death sentence. Stage 2 breast cancer. I remember sitting in the sterile clinic room with the paper gown crinkling beneath me and my hands shaking so violently I could barely unlock my phone. I dialed my mother, expecting the warmth and comfort only a parent can provide when your world is falling apart. Instead, when I choked out the words, "Mom, I have cancer," she let out a long, exasperated sigh. I can never forget what she said next. She told me, "Maya, I really cannot deal with this bad luck right now. Your sister Chloe is doing her final wedding dress fitting, and Trent's family is flying in. Do not ruin this day for her." Then she hung up. I went through 8 months of grueling chemotherapy entirely alone. I lost my hair, my weight, and my faith in the people who were supposed to protect me. I vomited in my small apartment bathroom with no one to hold my hair back. 4 years later, I am completely cancer-free, and I have built a life they could never comprehend. Then last week my phone rang. It was my mother, sobbing uncontrollably because she had suffered a stroke and needed a full-time caregiver. My answer to her took exactly 6 words. But before I tell you what those 6 words were and how I finally walked away, let me tell you how my arrogant white brother-in-law helped me completely dismantle my toxic family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to save your own life. The amber liquid burned the back of my throat as I took a slow sip of aged bourbon. I was sitting on my emerald green velvet sofa, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse that offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. The city lights sparkled below me, a glittering reminder of everything I had built with my own 2 hands. My cybersecurity firm had just closed its most profitable quarter yet, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely untouchable. That peace was shattered when my phone vibrated on the glass coffee table. The screen flashed with a FaceTime request from my father, Deacon Marcus. Seeing his name always brought a familiar knot of tension to my stomach, but tonight I felt different. I tapped the screen and answered. My father did not offer a hello or ask how my day was. He never did. The camera angle was unflattering, pointing up at his stern face and his perfectly trimmed mustache. He was wearing his Sunday suit despite it being a Tuesday evening, always needing to look the part of the respected church leader. Behind him I could see the pale green walls of a hospital room. My mother, Mama Evelyn, was lying in the hospital bed, with one side of her face visibly drooping. Maya, pack up your apartment and get over here. My father demanded, his voice booming with the unquestionable authority he used on his congregation. Your mother had a stroke this morning. The doctors say the left side of her body is paralyzed, and she is going to need round-the-clock care when she is discharged next week. We need you to clear out the basement room at the house and set it up for yourself. You are moving back home to take care of her. I sat perfectly still, swirling the bourbon in my glass. The ice clinked softly against the crystal. He did not ask if I had the time. He did not ask if I was willing. He issued a directive fully expecting me to drop my entire existence to serve the woman who had abandoned me during my darkest hour. I am sorry to hear about her stroke, I said, keeping my voice meticulously calm and level. But I will not be moving into the basement, and I will not be her caregiver. You will need to look into hiring a home health aide or finding a rehabilitation facility. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. My father stared at the screen as if I had just spoken to him in a foreign language. His face darkened with that familiar rage he reserved specifically for me whenever I stepped out of the tiny, insignificant box he had placed me in. "Excuse me," he barked, his voice rising. "You do not tell me what I need to do. This is your mother, Maya. Family takes care of family. You do not have a husband, and you do not have any children tying you down. You just sit around fixing computers all day. You have nothing holding you back from doing your duty." The sheer audacity of his words washed over me, but instead of the usual sting of rejection, I felt absolutely nothing. For my entire life, they had viewed my independence not as an achievement, but as a failure. Because I was not married to a wealthy man like my sister Chloe, my time and my life were considered completely worthless and therefore entirely at their disposal. Before I could respond, the camera violently jerked to the side. My sister Chloe shoved her face into the frame, practically pushing our father out of the way. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she was wearing a silk designer blouse that probably cost more than some people make in a month. Even in a hospital room, she had to make sure she looked like absolute perfection. "Are you out of your mind, Maya?" she shrieked, her voice dripping with venom. "Mom is lying here paralyzed, and you are being this selfish. You are so ungrateful after everything this family has done for you." I leaned back into the velvet cushions, crossing my legs. "What exactly has this family done for me, Chloe?" I asked softly. She completely ignored the question, launching straight into her practiced victim routine. Fake tears welled up in her eyes as she glared at the camera. "You know Trent and I cannot do it," she cried, referencing her wealthy hedge fund manager husband. "Trent is working 80-hour weeks managing his investments, and I am overwhelmed running our charity foundation. We are building a legacy here in Atlanta. We actually have important responsibilities and a reputation to uphold. You have a ton of free time and no real commitments. You have to move home and do this. It is your job as the single sister to step up." I want to take a moment to reflect on Chloe standing there in the hospital room. She was 36 years old, but still acted like the spoiled teenager who threw tantrums when the spotlight shifted away from her for even a second. Her entire identity was wrapped up in being Trent Sterling's wife. Trent was a white hedge fund manager who loved playing the white savior to a prominent black family. He loved the prestige of my father's position at the mega church, and my father loved Trent's money. Together, they had created an echo chamber of elitism and arrogance. And Chloe, she was the crown jewel of their little empire. She played the part of the wealthy black socialite, perfectly attending galas, hosting brunches, and making sure everyone on Instagram knew how incredibly blessed she was. Meanwhile, I was the dark cloud, the sister who wore hoodies and worked with code, the sister who did not fit the aesthetic. When I got sick, it was as if my cancer was a personal inconvenience to their brand. And now that their brand was threatened by the reality of a paralyzed mother, they were desperately trying to shove the dirty work onto me. "You want me to throw away my life because you are too busy pretending to run a charity?" I asked, leaning closer to the camera. "I am not pretending," Chloe spat back, her eyes flashing with real anger now. "Trent and I are pillars of this community. We cannot exactly pause our lives to change adult diapers and administer medication. That is why you need to be realistic, Maya. You are alone. You have the flexibility. Quit whatever little tech support job you are doing right now and get over here. Mom needs you, and Dad cannot manage this by himself. Stop being a bitter, jealous sister and do what you are supposed to do for once in your life." The camera shook slightly as she glared at me, breathing heavily from her rant. Behind her, I could hear the steady, rhythmic beeping of my mother's heart monitor. My mother, the woman who could not be bothered to hold my hand while poison was pumped into my veins to save my life, was now lying there expecting me to sacrifice my freedom for her comfort. The entitlement was so thick, it was suffocating. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my bourbon, letting the silence stretch between us. I wanted them to feel the weight of my refusal. I wanted them to realize that the dynamic had permanently shifted. I was no longer the scapegoat they could order around at will. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "I am not your maid. I am not your backup plan. And I am certainly not the solution to your inconvenience. You want Mom taken care of, then you and your wealthy husband can open up your wallets and hire a professional. Because I will not be stepping foot in that basement." Chloe shoved her face so close to the camera lens that her features distorted, filling my monitor with a portrait of absolute terror. Her perfect makeup was completely ruined, her eyes darting frantically off screen as she furiously tapped at her own mobile phone. I watched her perfectly manicured fingers trembling violently against the glass screen. She was opening her banking apps, trying to find any shred of the wealth she had based her entire identity around. I knew exactly what she was seeing. Red error messages, locked accounts, zero balances across the board. Every single offshore account, every credit card, every luxury line of credit tied to Trent's fraudulent empire had been seized and frozen by federal authorities. The air in Trent's office seemed to evaporate. Chloe let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. She dropped her phone onto the mahogany desk as if it had physically burned her. She spun around to face Trent, completely ignoring the fact that I was still watching them on the video call. "You told me we were protected!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. "You told me the Cayman accounts were untouchable. My platinum cards are declining, Trent. The bank just locked me out of the joint accounts. You said you were wealthy. You promised me you would take care of me. You promised me we were building a dynasty." Trent looked like a cornered rat. His face was pale and slick with cold sweat. He ran his hands through his disheveled blonde hair, pacing back and forth like a trapped animal. He tried to shush her, reaching out to grab her shoulders, but Chloe violently swatted his hands away. She was unraveling completely, losing the polished high society persona she had spent years cultivating. "Do not touch me!" she screamed, pushing him backward. "You lied to me. You used my parents' house. You used the church. You made me look like a fool in front of all of Atlanta. I married a millionaire, not a cheap con artist who steals from old people. What am I supposed to tell my friends? What am I supposed to do when the country club finds out my husband is a broke criminal going to federal prison?" "Shut up," Trent roared, his voice cracking. He glanced at the webcam, suddenly remembering that I was bearing witness to their complete destruction. He lunged toward Chloe, grabbing her by the arms and shaking her. "Stop acting like a spoiled brat. You knew exactly what we were doing. You happily spent the money. You wanted the bags and the cars and the luxury vacations. You are just as guilty as I am." "I did not do anything," Chloe cried out, trying to wrench herself free from his grip. "You are the one who forged the documents. You are the one who stole the money. I will testify against you, Trent. I swear to God, I will tell the FBI everything if it keeps me out of jail. I am not going down for your pathetic mistakes." The sound of the slap echoed sharply through my computer speakers. It was a loud, vicious crack of flesh against flesh. Trent had struck her across the face with the back of his hand, hitting her so hard that she stumbled backward and crashed into a leather armchair. I sat perfectly still in my penthouse, watching the illusion of their perfect marriage shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces. This was the man my family had worshipped. This was the white savior they had elevated above their own flesh and blood. A violent, desperate fraud who hit his wife the second his money ran out. Chloe touched her reddening cheek, her eyes wide with shock. For all her cruelty, she had never truly understood the monster she married. She thought his arrogance was a sign of power, but it was only a mask for his cowardice. I leaned forward, bringing my face close to the microphone. "I hope the country club membership was worth it, Chloe," I said, my voice dead flat, devoid of any pity. "The authorities have everything they need. Have a nice life." I ended the video call before either of them could say another word. The monitor faded to black, leaving my office in total silence. The corporate espionage was complete. Trent was ruined, and Chloe was trapped in the wreckage of her own greed. But there was still one final piece of business left to attend to. The architects of my misery, my own parents, were still sitting in their suburban mansion, completely unaware that their golden empire had just collapsed. I picked up my phone and opened the text thread with my father. He had sent 3 more messages in the last hour, demanding to know why I had not responded to his orders about moving into the basement to care for my paralyzed mother. He was still trying to exert his misplaced authority, still trying to force me back into the box they had built for me. He actually believed he still held the cards. I cracked my knuckles, taking a deep breath of the cool, conditioned air in my apartment. It was time to deliver the final blow. I typed a single message, keeping it as precise and clinical as a surgeon's scalpel. "Your house has been foreclosed by the bank because Trent failed to pay the secret mortgage he took out against it. The property is being seized. I will see you at home at 3:00 this afternoon." I hit send. I did not wait for his reply. I stood up from my desk, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and looked out over the city. I was no longer the sick, discarded daughter weeping in an oncology ward. I was the executioner, and the eviction notice had just been served. The heavy oak door of my childhood home in Buckhead swung open with a familiar hollow creak. I stepped into the foyer, letting the absolute silence of the house wash over me. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty living room blinds, casting a sickly yellow glow over the complete ruin of my family's empire. Brown cardboard moving boxes were stacked haphazardly against the custom silk wallpaper my mother used to brag about to her church friends. I walked slowly into the center of the room, letting the sharp, authoritative click of my designer heels echo against the hardwood floor. The scene before me was a masterpiece of poetic justice. My mother sat slumped in her medical wheelchair in the middle of the chaos. The left side of her face sagged from the stroke, but her right eye darted nervously around the room, still clinging to a desperate need for control. Next to her stood my father, Deacon Marcus. The proud, booming church leader who loved to parade his authority was entirely gone. His pastoral suit was wrinkled, his shoulders were severely hunched, and he looked as though he had aged 20 years in a single night. And then there were the architects of this disaster. Chloe sat on a half-taped cardboard box, clutching a deflated designer handbag to her chest like a life preserver. Her face was bare and pale, her eyes bloodshot from crying. The glamorous socialite persona had vanished completely. A few feet away, Trent paced frantically by the stone fireplace, looking like a trapped rat. The federal authorities had clearly paid him a visit. The arrogant white savior who had threatened to freeze my bank accounts yesterday was now sweating profusely through a cheap undershirt, biting his fingernails and checking a phone that I knew had been disconnected for non-payment. They all froze the second they saw me. For a long, tense moment, nobody breathed. I stood tall and perfectly composed, holding a sleek leather portfolio in my left hand. I did not offer a warm greeting. I did not rush over to comfort my paralyzed mother. I simply stood there and watched them marinate in their own pathetic reality. My father was the first to break the silence. He stumbled forward, practically tripping over a stack of packing tape, and stopped just a few feet away from me. He looked at my tailored suit, and then up at my face, His eyes were wide and brimming with desperate, panicked tears. "Maya," he gasped, his voice cracking pathetically. "You came! Thank God you came!" I did not move a muscle. I just stared at him, waiting for the inevitable demand. Because even in the face of total destruction, my family only knew how to take. "We saw the news, Maya," my father continued, his voice rising in pitch. "The entire city saw the news. You sold your cybersecurity firm. They are saying you walked away with $85 million. Maya, you are wealthy. You are incredibly wealthy." He did not say congratulations. He did not say he was proud of me for building an empire from absolutely nothing. He just went straight for my wallet. "The bank is coming tomorrow morning, Maya," my father pleaded, his hands shaking as he reached out toward me. "They are bringing the eviction notices. Trent made some bad investments. He got in over his head, and he leveraged this house to cover the losses. But we can fix this. You can fix this. You have $85 million. You have to save this family, Maya. You have to pay off your brother-in-law's debt so we do not end up on the street." And then the unthinkable happened. Deacon Marcus, the man who demanded respect from everyone who crossed his path, the man who had disowned me for being a sick inconvenience, suddenly dropped heavily to his knees, right there on the hardwood floor. He knelt at the feet of the daughter he had thrown away. He grabbed the hem of my suit jacket, looking up at me with absolute sheer desperation. "Please, Maya," he begged, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. "I am begging you. Do not let them take our home. Pay the bank. Pay Trent's legal fees so he does not go to federal prison. We are your blood. You have to save us." I looked down at the top of his head, feeling a cold, clinical detachment. I shifted my gaze to Trent. The cowardly man had stopped pacing and was now staring at me with a sickening glimmer of hope in his eyes. He actually believed that my father begging on his knees would be enough to crack me. He actually thought I would hand over millions of dollars to keep a white-collar criminal out of a federal penitentiary just to protect the family name. "It is just a temporary liquidity issue," Maya Trent piped up, stepping away from the fireplace and trying to muster a fraction of his old, arrogant tone. "If you just clear the mortgage and post my bail money, I can generate returns by next quarter. I have a strategy. We can keep this entirely quiet and keep the church out of it. You just need to write the check and I will handle the rest." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his words hung in the stale air. He had insulted my race, my appearance, my intelligence, and my illness just hours ago, and now he was asking me to fund his legal defense. Before I could even respond, Chloe leaped up from her cardboard box. She rushed over and stood next to our kneeling father, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You have to do it!" "Maya," Chloe screamed, her voice shrill and grating. "You are rich now. You have more money than you could ever spend. Do not be so incredibly selfish. Mom is paralyzed in a wheelchair. She needs round-the-clock care and a stable home. You cannot just stand there and let the bank throw a disabled woman out onto the street. You owe us this. You owe Trent for keeping this family afloat while you were hiding in your apartment doing nothing." I slowly reached down and firmly peeled my father's trembling fingers off my suit jacket. I took one deliberate step back, putting physical distance between myself and their delusion. I looked at Chloe, who was panting heavily from her outburst, and then I looked at my mother, who was staring at me from her wheelchair with a pathetic, pleading expression. "I owe you," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet, slicing through the tension in the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. "You think I owe you $85 million of my hard-earned money to bail out a fraudulent white savior who literally stole your retirement fund?" I slowly opened my leather portfolio and pulled out a stack of pristine, legally binding documents. I held them up so the afternoon light caught the embossed seals on the paper. "Let us talk about what I owe this family," I said, stepping closer to Chloe, making her instinctively shrink back. 4 years ago, I sat in a freezing oncology ward with poison dripping into my veins. I needed $22,000 to save my own life. And you, Chloe, you decided that an archway of imported French orchids was more important than my survival. You and Mom drained my savings account and left me to die so you could impress Trent's country club relatives. You told me to go take out a loan. You told me not to ruin your perfect wedding with my inconvenient cancer. Chloe swallowed hard, the color rapidly draining from her face. That was different, she stammered, backing away. That was a long time ago. We did not know how sick you really were. You knew exactly how sick I was. I shot back, my voice echoing off the bare walls of the living room. You just did not care. You cropped me out of the Thanksgiving photos because a bald, dying sister did not fit your wealthy aesthetic. You let me vomit blood on my bathroom floor alone while you drank champagne. And you, Trent, I turned my gaze to the sweating man by the fireplace. You called me a diseased, ugly dropout this morning. You threatened to freeze my bank accounts and force me to wipe my mother's chin, just to stroke your own fragile ego. I walked over to my father, who was still kneeling on the floor, and looked down at him with absolute disgust. You allowed a con artist to mortgage your home because you were so desperate to be adjacent to his white privilege, I told my father plainly. You let him parade around your church and steal from your congregation because you wanted the prestige. You sold your soul, and you sold your daughter to the highest bidder. And now that the check bounced, you want me to swoop in and play the hero. My father bowed his head, sobbing into his hands. My mother let out a loud wailing cry from her wheelchair, slapping her good hand against her knee. Maya, please, my mother, wept, her speech slurred from the stroke. We are so sorry. We were wrong. Please do not let them throw me out. I am your mother. Have mercy on us. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, feeling nothing but a profound emptiness where my love for her used to reside. They did not want mercy. They wanted a free pass. They wanted to escape the consequences of their own monstrous greed. I tapped the legal documents against the palm of my hand, preparing to deliver the final killing blow to their delusions of grandeur. I was not there to save them. I was there to hand them the bill for everything they had stolen from me. I tossed the leather portfolio onto a stack of taped cardboard boxes. The heavy thud made Chloe flinch, but I did not stop moving. I began to walk a slow, deliberate circle around my mother in her wheelchair, forcing her and my father to turn their heads to keep their eyes on me. The space in the living room felt suffocating to them, but to me it was a stage I fully controlled. You keep throwing that word around, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. Family. You sit there weeping and begging for mercy in the name of family. But let me ask you something, Evelyn. Where was this profound dedication to family 4 years ago? My mother trembled violently, her good hand gripping the armrest of her wheelchair. Her speech was heavily slurred as she tried to defend herself. We did not know, she stammered. We thought the doctors had it under control. We were just so overwhelmed with the wedding preparations. I stopped directly in front of her, leaning down so my face was inches from hers. I wanted her to see the cold, absolute certainty in my eyes. You knew exactly what was happening, I whispered harshly. You knew I was sitting in a freezing oncology ward with poison burning through my veins. You knew I was vomiting blood and losing my hair. And while I was staring death in the face, you walked into a bank, looked the teller in the eye, and drained my entire life savings. My mother squeezed her eyes shut, but I refused to let her look away. Look at me, I demanded. You took $22,000 of my money, the money I broke my back to save just so you could buy imported French orchids for Chloe's reception. Did you think about family when you swiped my card? Did you think about your daughter going into septic shock alone while you posed for pictures with Trent's country club relatives? You literally cropped me out of the Thanksgiving photos because my bald head clashed with your perfect high society aesthetic. You erased me to impress a man who ended up stealing your home. Chloe covered her face, sobbing loudly, but I ignored her entirely. My father tried to stand up, his knees popping in the quiet room. Maya, please, he begged, his voice breaking. She is paralyzed. She is paying for her sins. You do not need to do this. I turned my sharp gaze to him. And you, Marcus, I snapped, stripping him of his holy title. You stood on a pulpit every Sunday preaching about righteous living while you let your wife steal from your sick child. You let this arrogant con artist mortgage your legacy because you were too cowardly to admit you cared more about proximity to whiteness and fake wealth than you cared about your own flesh and blood. You sold me out for a seat at a table that Trent did not even own. The mention of Trent's complete failure was the spark that ignited the final powder keg. Trent had been standing by the fireplace, sweating profusely, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. He had lost everything. His hedge fund was seized, his bank accounts were frozen, his reputation in Atlanta was incinerated, and now the final safety net he thought he could bully out of me was gone. His facade of superiority completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but a violent, desperate animal. "You ruined my life!" Trent roared, his voice cracking as he stepped away from the stone hearth. His face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you are so smart. You think you can just march in here and destroy everything I built. I gave this family relevance. I gave you status. You are nothing but a bitter, vindictive dropout." I stood my ground, not taking a single step back. "You built a house of cards on stolen money, Trent," I replied coolly. "I just opened the window." Trent let out a primal scream of rage. The last shred of his sanity snapped. He lunged across the living room, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. His hands were curled into tight fists, and his eyes were wild with the intent to physically destroy the woman who had bested him. Chloe screamed his name in horror. My father shouted and reached out, but he was too slow. I did not flinch. I did not even raise my hands to defend myself. I just stood there perfectly calm because I knew exactly what was coming. Before Trent could even cross the last 2 feet between us, the dusty blinds of the living room windows were suddenly illuminated. Brilliant flashing streaks of red and blue light painted the walls, slicing through the dim yellow gloom of the house. The deafening wail of police sirens pierced the air, followed by the screeching of heavy tires stopping violently on the front lawn. Trent froze mid-stride. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He slowly turned his head toward the front door, his chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked gasps. The heavy oak door did not just open. It was thrown open with such violent force that the brass handle punched a hole straight into the drywall. Federal agents opened the door, a commanding voice roared. A half-dozen federal agents and local police officers swarmed into the foyer, tactical gear strapped to their chests. They bypassed my parents completely and locked their eyes on Trent. 2 agents rushed forward, grabbing Trent by the shoulders and slamming him face first against the stone fireplace. "Trent Sterling, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and elder financial abuse," the lead agent stated firmly, yanking Trent's arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly in the room. Trent struggled weakly, his face pressed against the cold stone. "This is a mistake," he stammered, his voice pathetic and trembling. "I am a respected investment manager. You have the wrong man. My lawyer will have your badges for this. You have the right to remain silent." The agent continued, completely ignoring his pathetic protests. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Chloe completely lost her mind. She threw herself off the cardboard box and rushed toward the agent, screaming hysterically. "You cannot take him!" she wailed, clawing at the air near the agent's tactical vest. "He is my husband. He is innocent. Tell them, Trent. Tell them it is a mistake." Another officer stepped in front of Chloe, holding out a firm hand to block her path. "Mom, step back immediately, or you will be detained for interfering with a federal arrest." Chloe collapsed onto her knees, clutching her deflated designer handbag to her chest, and sobbing so violently she could barely breathe. Her perfect world, her endless supply of luxury, her status in the elite circles of Atlanta, it was all being dragged out the front door in handcuffs. Trent looked back over his shoulder as the agents hauled him toward the exit. His eyes locked with mine one last time. There was no arrogance left. There was no white savior complex. There was only the hollow, terrified stare of a man who knew his life was over. I stood perfectly still, smoothing the front of my jacket. "Have a safe trip, Trent," I said softly, knowing he could read my lips even over Chloe's deafening screams. The front door slammed shut behind them, plunging the living room back into a heavy, ringing silence, broken only by the sound of my sister's hysterical weeping and my father's ragged breathing. The police lights continued to flash through the windows, casting dancing shadows over the packed cardboard boxes. The golden empire of the Sterling and Washington families had been completely, utterly eradicated. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the pristine walls of the foyer one last time as the federal agents shoved Trent into the back of an armored SUV. The heavy vehicle sped down the manicured driveway, taking the arrogant white savior and all his counterfeit wealth away in handcuffs. The loud wail of the sirens slowly faded into the humid Atlanta night, leaving behind a thick, suffocating silence inside the mansion. Chloe remained curled on the hardwood floor, a pathetic, crumpled pile of designer silk and ruined makeup, sobbing so hard she was choking on her own breath. I stood perfectly still in the center of the wreckage. I looked down at the people who had built their entire identity on an illusion of superiority. My father, Deacon Marcus, crawled forward on his knees, navigating around the taped cardboard boxes until he reached my feet. He grabbed my hands, his palms sweating profusely. He squeezed my fingers with a desperate, trembling grip. "Maya," he pleaded, his voice raw and unrecognizable. "The bank is coming tomorrow morning to officially seize the property. But Trent is gone now. We can fix this. You have $85 million, Maya. You can call the bank right now. You can buy the house back. You can save our legacy." My mother violently pushed the wheels of her medical chair, rolling herself closer to me. Her good hand reached out to grasp the hem of my suit jacket. "Yes, Maya," she cried out, her slurred speech thick with desperation. "We knew you would not let us fall. You are a good daughter. The Lord blessed you with this wealth so you could protect your family in our hour of need. Just write the check, Maya. Save our home." I looked down at the two of them. They were looking up at me as if I were a deity standing on a pedestal holding the keys to their salvation. I slowly pulled my hands out of my father's sweaty grip. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out a thick legal document. I held it up, allowing the dim light of the living room to catch the gold notary seal on the front page. "You do not need to worry about the bank coming tomorrow," I said, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I already bought this house from the bank. I paid off the defaulted mortgage in full 48 hours ago." My father's eyes widened with pure, unfiltered joy. He let out a loud gasp of relief, throwing his hands up in the air. "Praise God," he shouted, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Maya. Thank you. I knew you would not abandon us." My mother let out a loud, wailing cry of relief, pressing her hand to her chest. She reached for the deed, her eyes shining with greed. I smoothly pulled the document out of her reach. "I bought the house," I said, my tone dropping to a sharp, icy whisper. "But I did not buy it for you." The smiles froze instantly on their faces. The atmosphere in the room plummeted to freezing. "Yesterday afternoon, I transferred the full legal ownership of this estate to the Sisters of Hope Foundation," I stated, watching the hope completely drain from their eyes. "It is a highly respected nonprofit organization that provides free housing and emergency medical grants to Black women battling stage 2 breast cancer. They provide shelter for the women who cannot afford their hospital deposits because their own mothers stole their life savings to buy flowers." My father stopped breathing. He stared at me, his jaw hanging open in absolute horror as the reality of my words slammed into him. "The foundation plans to bulldoze this entire mansion next month." I continued, stepping back from them. "They are going to clear this land and build a state-of-the-art recovery center for chemotherapy patients. The charity directors will be arriving here tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp, accompanied by the local sheriff to take official possession of the asset. You have exactly 24 hours to pack whatever you can fit into the trunk of your cars and vacate my property." I turned on my heel and began walking toward the grand foyer. My footsteps echoed sharply against the hardwood floor, measuring the final seconds of their reign. Behind me, the absolute gravity of the situation finally broke through my mother's profound denial. She gripped the wheels of her medical chair and tried to push herself forward, struggling weakly against her own paralyzed body. "Maya, you cannot do this to me!" My mother screamed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail of absolute terror. "I am paralyzed, Maya. I need a full-time caregiver. I cannot feed myself. I cannot bathe myself. You are my daughter. Are you really going to throw me out on the street and let me die in some state-run nursing home? Who is going to take care of me? I reached the heavy oak front door and pulled it wide open. The warm golden light of the late afternoon sun flooded into the dark, stifling hallway. The brilliant light from outside hit my back, casting my long, sharp shadow completely over them. It covered the taped cardboard boxes, it covered my defeated father, and it swallowed my mother and Chloe in total darkness. I stopped right at the threshold. I reached up and slowly pulled off my dark Chanel sunglasses, turning my head to look over my shoulder. I looked directly into my mother's panicked, tear-filled eyes. I looked at the woman who had left me to vomit blood alone so she could buy imported orchids for a sister who was now sobbing uselessly on the floor, incapable of even saving herself. "Ask the daughter you actually chose," I said. I articulated every single word slowly and clearly, letting the absolute finality of that sentence strike her like a physical blow. Her mouth opened in silent horror, but I did not stay to watch the aftermath. I stepped out onto the front porch and pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me. The loud, definitive slam echoed like a gunshot, ringing out across the manicured lawn, sealing their fate forever. I walked down the stone pathway, breathing in the sweet scent of the Georgia pines. A gleaming black Rolls-Royce was idling smoothly at the end of the driveway, my personal driver standing ready, holding the rear door open for me. I slid into the plush leather seat and let out a long, cleansing breath. A perfectly genuine, peaceful smile spread across my face. As the luxury car glided smoothly down the street, leaving that house of horrors behind. Forever, I looked out the tinted window at the fiery orange and purple hues of the Atlanta sunset. They used to call me a failure because I did not have a wealthy husband to parade around or glamorous pictures to post online. But they forgot one crucial detail. The woman who walks out of a chemotherapy ward entirely alone is a woman who no longer fears anything in this world. I am Maya Washington, and I am entirely too busy living my life. The screen fades to black.